Dominique, thank you for spending some time with us today. I know there was just a birthday celebration, I believe, for her.
Yes, 2-year-old on December 10th. So yes, we're still very much in birthday mode. I think she thinks it's a year-long thing. So she sings happy birthday to herself very often.
Welcome. I don't know, would you like to share your screen? Or
yeah, I will do that now. Oops, perfect. We jumped ahead too far. Hold on, give me 1 second to start from the beginning. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yes, so thank you all so much for inviting me to come and speak. Like Miranda said, my name is Dominique. I'm a licensed psychologist in the state of California. And I am here to share a little bit about my experience as a mom of a daughter and kind of both of us sharing the kind of identity as being a carrier for ALD. So I kind of broke down my slides into a couple of different phases of our journey. So just a little bit about our beginnings. I always, as a very young person, had this strong desire to be a grandmother, which was very odd. I was A-okay with skipping this phase as being a mom and just wanted to jump straight into grandmotherhood. I think mostly to do with my relationship with my own grandmother, so much so that it began to shape my career. So I'm a licensed psychologist and primarily identify as the geropsychologist, so work with older adults. Paired with this desire to be a grandmother, which I rationally knew required me to be a mother first. I also had this really irrational fear of infertility. I waited until a little later in life to have children, but all the while kind of struggling with this thought that I wouldn't be successful in that area. Again, paired with probably in my early 30s, late 20s, being diagnosed as having sickle cell carrier trait. And so having that anxiety carrying into this whole family planning process. Pretty early on, my husband got tested and he didn't have the trait. So we felt pretty good about, entering into, okay, we just got married. Let's work on trying to have this family. It did take us a while, which created a lot of stress, doubt, uncertainty about, again, like, is this going to happen for us? But we were blessed to find out in March that we were pregnant and able to have a baby. And that was in 2019, I think. My dates are off, one of those years. But here, clearly love older people, and so much so dressed up as such, and our little puppy revealing to the world that we were expecting this child. Sort of all in the same phase of pregnancy and labor and delivery. We kind of debated back and forth about just a general genetic screening that is offered to all families. We identify as Christian, and we're conflicted about what it would mean to learn that our child, who isn't even in this world, has some form of a genetic condition. And so for a long while debated, like, do we do this? Do we not? Ultimately decided to go forth with it, knowing that it would help to inform us about how we thought about the remainder of the pregnancy and entered into this new stage as parents. But yes, a challenge. Also, as most first-time parents, were trying to predict what the sex of this baby was going to be. Was it going to be a boy, a girl? I, as a pregnant woman, thought for sure it was going to be a boy. And so very surprised when we found out we were expecting a girl. But now, knowing what I know now, am aware of the blessing in that. But yes, went forth with our pregnancy and was a week and some change past my due date, 72 hours of labor, and ultimately had to get a C-section, which was very disappointing, which then led into the very kind of standard, typical first 24 hours of postpartum of, the not so typical part of finding out that my daughter had jaundice and had to go through light therapy. And, that first morning of waking up and having all the providers come in and out, it was just a blur, honestly. And, during that process, unknowingly to me, and I think probably because I was just out of surgery and trying to figure out how to care for this baby, they went ahead and did all of the screening and other assessments and evaluations, part of which was to assess for ALD. So again, that combined with some breastfeeding challenges, we were quite a stressed family. A couple of pictures here of the three of us together, first couple of hours of birth, and then also first couple hours of postpartum, having to throw our newborn baby in this little, bassinet and not be able to kind of bond and build that relationship simply because of the jaundice. So I share all of this to sort of just give you a backdrop of the emotional toll and weight that we were dealing with, even going into this call that we received from the geneticists just about 2 weeks postpartum. And so at the time, we were between Kaiser and Sutter, which are two major healthcare systems in the area. And so I remember the day of the call, and we were getting blasted with all sorts of phone calls from both systems. So Sutter, where I delivered, was calling primarily my husband, and then Kaiser was calling both of us. And we answered the call at times, and they were just like, oh, expect a call from Kaiser and they'll give you more information. And we're like, okay, what does this mean? What are you trying to tell us? And then eventually I went out. It was probably like my first outing without my husband or the baby. And I honestly can't remember where I was going, but I do very vividly remember parking the car and taking the call from the geneticist. And it was right in front of a Popeyes in the morning, kind of mid-morning. And, I was, again, distracted by many things, but tried to be attentive to this conversation. And, I think it's hindsight reading into what I remember hearing of that phone call. But the main messages that I interpreted was, your daughter, diagnosed positive as a carrier for X-linked ALD. This condition really only impacts boys. Because she's a girl, you don't have much to really worry about. And there aren't any future or necessary, like upcoming, especially future treatments, assessment, much of anything. Really the only reason why, or I'm speaking from the geneticist standpoint, but really the only reason why we would need to be in touch moving forward is if you decide to, have more children in the future. He added then that women are really not symptomatic until much later in life, and that our next steps would be whenever we felt ready and prepared to do some genetic screening for my husband and I. And one of the points that really stood out to me that he made was that, sometimes, again, didn't really give numbers, but sometimes that it can be an anomaly, and that the child is sort of the first in the family to have the trait. And so that's something, as a new time mom, kind of mentally trying to take in this information, something that stood out to me. First was like, she's a girl, nothing to worry about. And then maybe this is an anomaly. Maybe this is nothing really to worry about. So we go, and so this was December 28th of 2021, or excuse me, 2019. And we go into a pandemic a few months later, and we are trying to survive and struggle to, parent while living through a pandemic. And so we went 1 year with, I don't know, hold on real quick. I think there's a slide that went missing. Oh, did I show this one? Oh no, I think I skipped over it. So this was the note, or these were the notes that I took during the call that I got from the geneticist. So he really kind of led with, Mila's a girl, nothing to worry about, next steps, and then outline sort of some of the complications that can happen for boy children. I think really informing us, again, if we were to decide to have future children, these were some of the things we would want to be thinking about or expecting of that process. But yes, skip forward 1 year, and we then had already sort of mentally planned that we weren't really thinking about having any more children until Mila had turned 1. And so as a result, again, I'm thinking, we're good, like maybe she's the first and we can deal with that later. Maybe, we can easily move into family planning with no worries. And so in February of 2021, we had decided to go on ahead and go and do our genetic testing and screening. And through that, I found out that I'm a carrier. And with that came a lot. I think for me, I felt the guilt as a mother, something about learning that you somehow pass this down to your child. I think both, and my heart, and I didn't really sort of speak to this in my intro, but my heart goes out to the parents of boys who are dealing with this from a much different side and perspective. And my hope is in sharing our story is that we can kind of add to this narrative from a different lens. But I imagine the pressure felt by mothers or fathers of boys is even more heightened. But even for myself of, passing this down to my child and knowing, that what I was dealing with as a 34-year-old woman is something that my daughter will later have to deal with as well. So from that parenthood standpoint, but also from the standpoint of being a member of my family, who's the first to find out that this is a part of our genes, and dealing with that weight of like, how do I tell my siblings? How do I tell my mom, who was my only living parent, that this is a thing and that we might need to like get tested and not really even myself knowing enough about it to even share and inform and enlighten them in a helpful way. So yes, dealing with a lot emotionally there, which then led us to finally sit down and do some genetic counseling, during which our options that were laid out for us were that we could conceive naturally and do prenatal screening. So at the 10-week mark, do some screening to identify if the fetus was a carrier, was positive for ALD or negative completely. We could choose to do IVF, or we could just kind of go about it with just nothing, of doing no testing, no screening, and no IVF. So I got that information and sat with it and really grappled with this choice that we were afforded in some respect. But I know for myself, something that I struggled with was this sort of God complex and moral dilemma of, with knowledge comes power. And sometimes that power isn't, I don't know what the right wording is, but it's a heavy power. And so, when I think about the mindset I went into wanting to conceive my daughter, there was no worry of like, if we had any health or, genetic issues to consider or think about. We were just wanting to have a family and experience the love and joy that comes with that. And then, being knowledgeable and mindful that, sure, with that comes the possibility of all sorts of complications. But this second stage of parent planning is much different. Now we have the knowledge of what it means to conceive a child and some of the complications that could be there for us. And so, like I mentioned, I'm a Christian, and part of this is, the faith that I and God will help me through whatever, the dynamics of parenting and living in the world that comes our way, while also knowing that I was given this knowledge. I had the blessing of being in a state that does this type of screening for a reason, and that I have this knowledge and now I have to do something with it. So that was definitely a big challenge. I think too, both my husband and I just struggling with this realization that we weren't going to have the, again, like the mental peace and freedom of being able to conceive naturally again. We were blessed to have it in our first experience, but that, moving forward, it wasn't going to be an option for us to have that, again, like that peace and kind of just neutral feelings about things. As a psychologist, a major thing for me, again, is like the acknowledgement of my feelings and reactions to things, but also building of a support system. And I would say very early on, it was rather limited. Again, I felt like I have this knowledge and what do I do with it kind of feeling. And again, like in sharing with my family about what we were going through meant sharing this medical information that may or may not apply to them as well. So it was like this dual role of like, I need you to help me think about this, while also I'm sharing and kind of delivering some bad news potentially to you as well. So it took a while for me to really feel that sense of comfort around sharing and seeking support. I think too, there was a lot of stigma in my family and in my community around infertility and IVF. I remember telling my grandma that we had decided that we were going to do IVF, and she was like, "You're going to let them do what with your body?" And so there was just not a lot of like, it just hasn't been something that's come up for us. And so not a lot of knowledge. And so again, in seeking support, challenging to educate people while also asking them for something. All the while just trying to kind of internally process my grief, and ultimately led me to start both individual and couples therapy, which has been extremely helpful. And then also to join several Facebook support groups for ALD. And that's where I got in contact with Miranda and was able to really feel immediately the support from her and from the community, just around this whole process and working to educate myself through others, essentially. So it was sort of a delayed process, but certainly something that I was able to build in terms of a support system. So a little bit about where we are now. As I mentioned, we did decide to go the IVF route, which came with lots of other stressors in terms of IVF not being covered by insurance in California. So then dealing with the weight of, okay, how we're going to financially afford this thing. And so we applied for an IVF giveaway from a local clinic here in Sacramento back in April and won, which was a huge blessing. And we recently completed our probe and are awaiting our start of stimulation at the end of the month. So super excited about that, and excited just in part. So the giveaway was a video contest where you kind of shared your story and shared your story of infertility, which already had me sort of hesitant, again, believing that this isn't a true infertility and that my story wasn't going to be respected or validated in a way that would allow us to win. So it was a win for our family, but also I very strongly believe a win for ALD. Again, to be recognized in a community of IVF and IVF infertility treatment, it just felt like an honor. And so part of winning involves us sharing our story. And so we will continue to do that throughout our process and bring attention and recognition to ALD and hopefully other genetic disorders as well. And so, yes, that's super exciting. I think present day, also some of the things we're dealing with as a family, and with the diagnosis of Mila and I being ALD carriers is Mila's had several like health issues and going to the ER, going to the hospital, I have learned that since that is literally the only diagnosis in her chart, everything is attributed to ALD, which is quite frustrating because at times, even in my limited knowledge, I feel that I'm in a position to educate providers about, being a woman with ALD or being a carrier of ALD. And so that's been a challenge. And then another surprising one for me is that I am trying to adult. And so we went and got a financial advisor, and she encouraged us to get disability insurance applied. And again, with that being the only, or pretty much the only other than sickle cell carrier diagnosis in my chart, we were denied, or I was denied disability insurance, which was a huge surprise to me. And it was solely because of being a carrier. And my husband, who has high blood pressure, he got awarded it very easily with no major issues. Again, just a challenge and surprise, for us in knowing what we know now. So just some takeaways and future considerations from, again, my very limited knowledgeable self, that for us, I think the receiving of results, I don't know what the standard is more generally, but I do think it was a challenge of it being a phone call versus an in-person session. Not only I was away from my husband, so I was like trying to take all these notes, but then I had to go back to him and share again what I was able to grasp in that. I don't remember how long conversation, but certainly challenging, and could imagine having an in-person being a little bit more kind of thorough and just holistic in a way. I feel that the geneticist that made the call was much more leaning on the like, don't worry, everything's good side, where I do feel, in hindsight now, and again, that might have been my interpretation of what the message was versus what he intended or what he gave. But on the flip side, wanting or wishing to have more of that realistic side of like, okay, here's the nitty gritty, here's what we need to really hone in on kind of conversation. In terms of individual differences and other considerations, I think I'm blessed to have the educational privilege and other privileges that make IVF an option for us. But certainly from, a financial or practical side, it can be very challenging sitting with that choice and knowing that a big piece of it is the financial side. So just in terms of that kind of conversation, more discussion around that. And then the timing, again, my daughter was 2 weeks at the time we got the information about the diagnosis, and a lot going on then, and just some of the challenges that we were going through. Hope for additional emotional and spiritual support for families. And then, from the healthcare system, pediatrician and healthcare education about ALD moving forward, I believe would be really beneficial. And then just a quick spotlight on benefits of screening from a daughter or mother of a daughter experience. The blessing that I received or that our family received, that it bought us time, that we have been able to, or at the time we had been able to have a year of living through a pandemic, taking care of a newborn, to then consider our choice and really think about, what all of this meant for us as a family and our future. It provided critical knowledge. Again, I believe that we have the power of caring for these children and, loving them in ways that allow them to have beautiful lives. And, it's important for us to know, just what our future is looking like and just the power of that. And then finally, just the power around the choice of deciding, what our future involves. Again, a heavy choice, but at least having that ability. And then real quick, I'm going to share just a little quick video of my husband and daughter in the car this morning, just to show you a little of Mila. And she's singing a song that she made up herself, and it's called Baby, I guess.
Come on, bye, baby. Yep.
It goes on for a minute and a half, but I won't have you all listen to it. But yes, hope that this is helpful. I know I'm short on time. I have 2 minutes. If there are any questions or anything that I can add, I would be more than happy to.
Well, you know, I'll be singing that to myself tonight when I'm trying to fall asleep, right?
I know. She's clearly got baby fever. She's ready for a sibling.
No, first I want to say the lens that you are providing, please don't minimize, because there's a general consensus among this community, both families, advocates, clinicians, that the women and the females are often ignored too much. So it's so important what you're doing today. And I just want to say thank you for your bravery. As someone who's 6 years in, I don't know that I could articulate the hopes and the fears that you did on that first slide, and the conversation with grandma, which I didn't even go there. So just thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all that and walking us through your journey and your experience. Please look at the chat when you get a chance, because people are just saying such nice things. But there was one question that I wanted to read from Shika. Thanks for sharing your experience, Domonique, and going through this experience. What hadn't you known about newborn screening that you learned during this process? And are you happy with your post-newborn screening experience and support?
Yeah, I knew nothing. I remember them telling us that they were going to do some newborn screens that would take about 2 weeks to get the results of. I had no idea what they were screening for. You know, honestly, we were like, okay, we're dealing with jaundice right now. Let's deal with that. And so, yes, knew nothing. And now of what I know, I feel so blessed to have, again, been living. You know, I mean, I grew up in California, so it's not sort of like a randomness, but just so blessed to be living in California where it is done. And I do think, I mean, I've had an amazing genetic counselor who's helped walk us through, helped even advocate for our insurance company, who doesn't pay for much of anything, but to cover part of the genetic testing for the probe. And so the support that I've received over time has been super helpful. You know, I think it could be more, but I've really, again, tried to create my own support system and circle around, you know, being a part of these different groups and other kind of ways of seeking support that have kind of filled in the gaps for when I don't always feel that from healthcare, which I generally expect, but yes, sometimes it can be frustrating.
Sure. And then Lydia has her hand raised, and then we'll move on to our next presenter, which is very relevant to this presentation.
Hi, Dominique. Love your story. And I mean, I went through the same thing with Stevie. He had jaundice and everything, but I already knew I didn't know he had ALD yet. But I'm just saying, I know how hard it is to tell other people about this, and especially when you got to tell your family. But everybody already had their kids. I was a late bloomer, so there's not much. Like, my sister already had her kids and everybody else was already older. Yeah. But you just got to, another thing is, I know for myself, I had to forgive myself because I felt like I gave this to my son, and he's, you know, still here today. But I always say, I'm still here for him. He smiles at me and he keeps me going. So, you know, forgive yourself. Don't let it break your spirit. Because when I get emotional, it's only because I want people to know that there's a life with this disease. You know, it may not be what everybody's life, like everybody says to me when they see me, oh, I'm so sorry. I said, I'm not sorry. I said, my baby's still breathing. He smiles at me. That's enough for me. You know, he's still with me. You know, I don't want to be in that pain when I lose him. But, you know, I'm on Facebook. I went to one of my other parents' son's funeral, and the pain, you know, I can even imagine her pain, but I want to be there for her. Yeah. And I took my son to her funeral, and I had him, I don't have a special car for him. I laid him down flat in my car and brought him. But I'm just saying, always keep in touch with the groups because they help a lot, especially when you feel like you try. You know, it's really hard for me. I have nobody to help me it's physically hard because you depend on the nurses. And all I get from my family is, how's Stevie? How's Stevie? How about mom? What's mom doing? Mom is tired. Mom needs a break. Can you bring me a meal or something?
Yeah.
I don't get that. It's strangers that reach out to you, you know? And that's why I said the ALG group has been good for me. I've been trying to help other mothers just like focus on the good, not, you know, so, I mean, you are blessed that you got at least a heads up,
Yeah,
you know, but
absolutely.
forgive yourself. Don't, you know, it's not your fault. Like I had to forgive myself because I felt terrible. And luckily I tied my tubes after Stevie because I knew I wasn't going to have no more.
Mhm.
But I'm just saying, making that next decision is going to be tough for you. But, you know, God will get you in the right place. And I just want to say, your story was beautiful. And thank God for the newborn screening. This just makes me so happy. And every time I see a little boy in Connecticut, I'm so happy to see that. I know he's been tested, you know, because the mother won't have the pain that I go through every day. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So thanks to Alicia and everybody else, and Miss Kelly in Connecticut. She made Connecticut happen too. So it was nice meeting. I hope we be in touch.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for that word. I needed that for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just, you know, have a blessed day. And everyone else, I'm going to be on here listening. Let me hang up and be quiet.
No, thank you so much, Lydia. We appreciate that. Thank you again, Dominique.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm glad you could be here. I really hope we get to meet you in person next time.
Yeah, for sure. I'll be there.